Going online. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Finance, Budget, and Enrollment Committee meeting. I would like to call this meeting to order by an acknowledgement. If everyone can stand up, thank you. We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, Miigwech. Can be seated. Thank you. I need someone for approval of the agenda. Can I have a mover and seconder? Trustee Laskin, Trustee Chernoslin, seconding. Trustees who are online, can you please disclose who is online?
Trustee Hassan here.
Sriska Naraja.
Shan.
Wong is here.
Trustee Arts here. Trustee Earhart here.
Trustee King here.
Thank
Trustee
you.
Williams is here.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm not sure if you heard, but Trustee Dawson also.
Thank you, Trustee Dawson.
And Hastings.
Thank you, Trustee Hastings. Committee members, can we vote by hands and say aye for approval
Aye.
of the agenda?
Aye.
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 Chair, we are not using the Scribe platform for this one. It's a housekeeping. So we
good?
believe that we've heard from the members at this point
Yeah.
on the approval of the agenda.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. That's right. We're not using the
move by hands.
application for this item.
Yeah.
Everyone has responded. The motion did carry.
It motion carried. Okay. Thank you then. Item number 3, declarations of possible conflict of interest. Trustees, this is your time. Hearing and seeing none. Item number 4, delegations. Do you have any delegates? Any written delegation? Seeing none. Item number 5, staff reports. 5.1, contract awards facilities. And who's speaking to this?
And through the chair, I'll ask Executive Officer Snyder to speak to this report.
Thank you and good evening, or good afternoon, trustees. On today's report, we only have a facilities report, and we have in Appendix A, 8 contracts for information. In Appendix B, we have 4 contracts for approval by the Finance and Budget Enrollment Committee. And in Appendix C, we have 8 contracts require board approval. In addition, as per the request of a previous board, there is 1 change order for information in Appendix F. And staff, both myself and facility staff are available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Craig. Trustees, anyone has questions? Trustee McLean, go ahead.
Thank you, and through the chair. Just to agenda page 6 in Appendix A, item 6. Just for the point of accuracy, it just indicates this is Ward 2, and I don't think it is. There's none of this that is familiar to me. The place it's moving from, the place it's moving to, I just think it's the wrong ward. So just so that, okay. Thanks.
Thank you, we'll amend that.
So will the correction be made?
yes, we'll take that on and do an amendment for when it goes to board.
Thank you, Craig. Any other trustees have questions? Do we have a list?
Trustee Art?
Go ahead, Trustee Arad.
Thanks. Actually, I don't have a question. I just, before the report goes to board, a couple of items on the list don't actually have, they're missing information. So there's a description, there's like an item number and then a description. And sorry, I'm driving, so I can't point out which ones. There's more than one item, and then a description of like that the equipment is out of date and needs to be replaced, but it doesn't actually say what it is. Like if it isn't, like some of them say PA system and what needs to be done. So there's a couple of them that are actually missing the what it is that needs to be replaced, and they're in the first series, I believe. So if that could just be fixed before the report hits board, that would be great. Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're happy to do that as well.
Thank you. That's it. No. Any more questions? I need a mover and seconder for this item. Trustee Laskin and Trustee McLean. Are we voting on each scribe? Yes.
None in favor.
Arts in favor?
Chernis Lynn in favor.
And it carries. Thank you. Moving along, item 5.3, 2022-2023 school budget and school, sorry, my apologies, item 5.2. First quarter interim financial report of 2023 and 2024. And who's going to speak to this?
Thank you, and through the chair, I will ask Executive Officer Snyder to speak to this report.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. This is a report for the first quarter from September 1st to November 30th of 2023, and this is for the first 3 months of operation. And as this is very similar in content we provided, the revised estimates, I'll be brief in my comments and happy to take questions. So we do outline some of the assumptions and risks in any projection, and the first obviously being enrollment, and we do show on page 16 the enrollments that we're currently seeing as of October 31st, knowing that March 31st still has to happen to have our ADE enrollment. We also highlight supply cost, and then we've added additional $5 million into the forecast, which was at revised estimates, to compensate for our anticipated cost for that. We do recognize inflationary pressures are still in our environment for both our supplies, such as maintenance, as well as our utilities and other costs, and we are still monitoring that carefully and report on any significant changes due to inflationary pressures. And of course, we do look at other changes such as interest rates, where that goes depending on the economic outlook and on the financial market volatility. And we are also still monitoring closely our national student revenue with the impact of the policy decisions made by the federal government. In appendices, we have 3 appendices for you tonight. The first one is a high-level financial position of the board in a PSAB format, and it does show, as we have told you through the revised estimate process, that we are looking at a 15.3 deficit versus the original budget of 15.1. So we're basically still on track. And it gives you enrollment information as well as staffing changes over the first quarter. The Appendix B provides a summary of revenues, and at the bottom of that Appendix C is notes to any significant variances in those revenues. And Appendix C provides an expenditures at the ministry level classification. Again, at the end of that appendices provides notes on any changes or variances higher than it would be expected. And through you, Chair, we are happy to take any questions you may have on this report.
Thank you, Executive Officer Snyder. Do you have a speakers list? Nothing online. Okay. Go ahead, Trustee Arts.
Thank you. I just wanted to get some clarification through you, Mr. Chair. Under the summary of revenues and expenditures, there's a line for, I believe it's classroom instruction, and then it says other expenses. And then another form has a breakdown of a lot of different costs. So on the summary form, are the other expenses everything that's on the other form? Or could you clarify what falls into other expenses that has essentially gone up? Because I'm curious because we have more students, we have a bit more revenue, but I know that, students also come with expenses. So I'm wondering, but the expenses are a bit higher than the revenue. So just looking for some clarification on what falls into the other expenses there.
Thank you, Trustee Arts.
So thank you for the question. So in the summary appendix A, in that expenditure section, the instructional expenses are those that relate to classroom instruction, and the other expenses are things like administration, facilities cost. And that's the split that you would see between those two numbers, basically.
Okay, so the classroom instruction is the teachers and other support staff, and then the other is the rest of everything that goes with the school, like principals and the caretaking costs and maintenance stuff.
Right, through you, Mr. Chair, if you were to look at Appendix C, the classroom instruction and the non-classroom where you have the principals and things, those two numbers would merge together to the instructional expenditures, and then the administration, transportation, and school operations and other non-operating would be the other expenditures.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Arts. Do we have anybody else? Thank you. Can I have a mover and seconder? Trustee Laskin, Trustee McLean. We're voting on e-scribe, right?
Laskin in favor.
McLean in favor.
Shan in favor.
Arts in favor.
Thank you. I need carries. Moving along item 5.3, 2022-23 school budget and school generated funds. And who's speaking on this?
Through the chair, I would ask Executive Officer Snyder to speak to this report, please.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, tonight's report is an annual report we provide to trustees around the 22-23 school budgets. And as I'll start off on page 23, school budget allocations in Appendix A are basically those that are funded through our GSNs and our school allocation formula in Appendix A. And the principals are responsible for using the school budget allocation to support their school improvement plans and student achievement. The other grants are a couple of different things that are encompassed here. And the other grants include PPFs, or priorities and partnership funding, as well as internal models such as model school allocations that come from other departments or urban priority high schools and things like that. And then school generated funds is primarily made up of two areas that would be familiar with trustees. That's the school generated funds that the school itself generates, as well as those funds generated through the school council. And they also encompass such things as donations. And they aren't to replace public funding, but they are there to supplement it. And there's a list of some examples on page 24 of that. So when we look at the 22-23, we allocate approximately $87 million to school budget allocations and prior year carryovers. And then in Appendix B, you can see that, as well as the school generated funds was an additional $35 million. So schools had access to approximately $122 million to support their needs at the local school level. In addition, we're going to talk, wait till we get to the appendices, about the Learning Opportunity Index and the impact it has on school budget and school generated funds. The chart on page 25 gives you an idea of the school generated funds over time over the last 5 years. And as you can see, as noted in the report, during the pandemic, the school generated funds dropped to a low of $4 million. But we are seeing a rebound, and while still under the 18-19 comparative year, it has rebounded from the low of $4 million. The bottom of this chart shows you the ending balances over 5 years as well of the school budget amount and the school generated funds balances. And of note, the 22-23, you'll see a change there because as the board approved, we had a carryover maximum of school budgets of 25%, and principals that requested it over the 25 carryover for special projects through business cases were identified and approved on a one-by-one review. The reason that the 25% cap was put in on the school budget allocation was those funds are really intended to support the students in the current year. And carrying over those amounts historically in some schools wasn't supporting our students. We wanted to ensure that our students are supported. The other important note, though, to make sure that everybody's aware of, the 25% carryover was only to the school budget allocation that comes through the GSN. The fundraising donations were all carried forward 100% and are still being carried forward 100% each year. I'd like to take a moment now and take you through the appendices of the report. And the Appendix A just gives you the school budget allocation model as it currently stands. And we will be working with our Principals Association to do a review of this to see if it's still appropriate in the ways and the methodology. Appendix B provides you that annual revenue by school. And what you'll see here, and I'm sorry, I'm partially colorblind, so I won't say colors, but you'll see the school budget allocation of both their annual allocation and their 21-22 carryover and a total. Then that other column is all those PPFs and other directed funds from like student success, model schools, and then you see the school generated funds in the second last column and the total by school of what they had available to them by school. At the bottom of that appendices, obviously the totals I referred to in the report. In Appendix C and D are important appendices that we've done for several years. And Appendix C shows a graph of school-generated funds per ADE or FTE of students versus the LOI. And as you'd expect, if you're a socially economic challenged school, you're a 1, and then affluent schools are near 0. It's just for people's reference in the chart. And you can see the trend line of the fundraising versus the socioeconomic status or LOI status of the school. However, Appendix D is an important appendix. When we take the school budget and school-generated funds, the curve is pretty flat. That shows what we believe to be equity across the district when you take both accounts into what the schools have access to support their students. So that's what we're trying to show you in that report. The final appendices is Appendix C, and this shows you the ending balances. And again, you see the school budget amount, and you see the school-generated funds as two numbers, and you see the total of their ending balances for 22-23 that would start coming into 23-24. And Mr. Chair, that concludes our report, and we're happy to take any questions on this as well.
Thank you, Executive Officer Snyder. Do you have a speakers list? Trustees online. Seeing and hearing none.
Sorry, Chair, Trustee Deovitis, I have a couple questions.
Yep, go ahead. Trustee
Thank you.
Deovitis.
One of the things that isn't here, and just want to ask if it's going to show up at a later report. One of the directions to schools last year was that they had to spend their budget, right? Like we changed how it is that we allowed the sort of year-to-year transfer of funds. When would we see that information? How successful were schools and able to spend their allocated funds year to year?
So through the chair, I would say there's still some work to do there. I think schools are trying and understand that we are asking them to emphasize spending the money on their current students. And we understand that sometimes schools have projects that may take you multiple years to do, like a library refresh, for example. So when we did our communications out to the school of the change in process, we explained that if they were needed to carry over 25% more of their base allocation, they could submit a business case to us that we would review and determine if we were going to support it. So I think next year, or this current year we're in, it'll be more interesting to see the results as we move forward. We realized some improvements we can do to the process that we'll bring forward this year. And I think now that the schools are used to this and kind of understand it better, I think we'll see a better understanding of usage patterns that we can talk about in next year's report for you.
Thank you. And through the chair, would that report then come at the end of the year or in the fall? Or at the end of the school year or in the fall? Like, are we waiting for that report for the school year to complete?
Yes, through the chair, it would be after the school year is complete because we have to close off our financials and close off the transactions for the schools. So it would be typically this report would come forward to January, February timeframe as it has now. We have to get the financial statements approved and out, and then we start to work on preparing this report for you. So it would come back typically in the January, February timeframe.
Okay, and would we have a sense of the impact on the 2024-25 budget on that request of schools to spend at least a higher proportion of their budget? Is that something that's going to have an impact on the budget process that we're going to initiate in a report a little later on today?
So through the chair, I would say that what we're trying to work with and what the school support team that is under Controller Stephanie Harris is we're trying to work closely with the schools to help them better plan to utilize their budgets. And so I don't think it'll have a direct impact on the overall budget of the board, but we do want to make sure that the schools are efficiently using their budget and planning appropriately. And where they need assistance, our team is more than happy to help them in developing their plans.
Thank you. And then changing the questions through the chair, Appendix D shows a graph, a line that illustrates how we compensate for lack of fundraising in certain schools and the investment that we make in higher LOI schools. Is there a sense of the targets that we need to be able to meet for schools in order to be able to meet the need that there are in those higher LOI schools? Or what does the chart imply? You sort of gave an explanation, excuse me, through the chair. Is there are there targets? Is there anything else that you can talk about the relationship that is described by that chart?
Thank you, and through the chair, I think, again, I'll start off with the chart. To me shows that while it's not a perfectly flat line, it's a much smoother slope. And so what we try to do is, and every school is unique and every school's needs change over time as well. But I think what we're trying to do and what we're going to do with our Principals Association is look at the allocations again. And I think we still want to make sure we're supporting the schools appropriately, but is the mechanism we're using as efficient as possible? Is there a way to flatten this line even more? So that's the conscious work that we're trying to do to ensure that we have equity of resources from a financials perspective, with i.e. school budgets and non-generated funds. And that's the work we all constantly monitor. And I can say with confidence, since we did start doing this report for you, this line has stayed pretty flat. It looks a little bit more non-flat, bad way of saying the term, but we are monitoring it, and over consistent years, it has been a very subtle slope. So we are seeing a trend over time that it seems to be an equitable allocation between those school budgets and what the schools themselves can generate.
Thank you. And just a last statement on this. I think as we move from this budget to next budget, one of the things that I would like to be able to work on is getting a grip and a better understanding on how it is that we allocate some of these funds that are found within the GSN, and that are supposed to be used for equity purposes, and what it is that we're accomplishing with that. You could argue that the line being flat, completely flat, would be equitable. So then you have to some degree equal investment per student. But then I would question that, because to be honest, the choices and and opportunities that different schools provide to kids aren't equal, and the life opportunities that different kids based on what schools they're attending aren't equal. So I think that's a conversation for us to continue to have, and that there would have to be a curve that tends higher towards the LOI side for us to be able to reach higher levels of equity, of opportunity. And that's something that I'd like to be able to explore in the future. So with that, thank you, Chair, and I'll cease my questions.
Thank you, Trustee DeVitis. Go ahead, Associate Director Stacy.
Thank you, and thank you, Trustee DeVitis, and appreciate that comment. And the only thing that I'll add is this does not include staffing, and we also have a differentiated staffing approach that you would likely see a higher staffing ratio at schools as well. And staffing, as we know, is our largest resource that we allocate. It's about 80% of our operating budget. So I think if we're going to do that, we should include the staffing resources as well. But I think it's an important exercise.
Thank you, Associate Director. Trustee McLean, go ahead.
Through the chair, to Executive Officer Snyder, can you please share with me you talked about the business cases that schools could apply if they were exceeding their 25 and they wanted. Can you share just on an approximate basis how many of those are refused and the kind of reasons why?
So you, Chair, just talking with my colleague, I would say roughly 20% that we said no, that they had sufficient funds and they weren't within their 25% to do the projects they outlined. And that, again, we asked for the information. We went back and forth on several of them, so it wasn't just an arbitrary. We had discussions with them. But it is an area that we need to provide clearer direction. It was a learning for both us as staff as well as the schools, but I would say approximately 20% were declined. They had sufficient, we believe, within the 25% carryover to do what they wanted to accomplish with their money.
Okay, thank you. And I agree that I think that there's a learning curve, because clearly some of them were thinking that their case was going to meet the criteria, and then to have 1 in 5 not meet the criteria. Clearly there's a disconnect as to what would qualify for that kind of use and not. So thank you for that. And again, through the chair, I'm just kind of asking from a sense that, like, as a taxpayer and knowing people in government, particularly the federal government, they used to have this magical March 31st date. And it was always a big thing that if you were in government, you had to spend your budgets, because if you didn't spend your budgets, you showed everybody that you didn't need it all and you lost it. So they went, whether they needed it was the, common practice to find something to spend the money on, or else you'll lose it. And as someone who sat around the horseshoe for a number of years now, and at the end of the day, in the budget process, we spend a lot of time trying to decide what we can save and what we have to cut. This money that we're actually taking back actually allows us to, hire CYWs and use in a different manner. So I'm just trying to confirm that there isn't this philosophy out there that if they should happen to go, not use the money that was allocated them for a particular school year and would have a surplus, that we would, claw back everything over the 25%, that didn't affect future years, and that, they just were lucky with some of the expenditures in their building so that they didn't incur this philosophy of having to spend it to maintain what is their reasonable expectation from year to year as it pertains to their budget.
And through you, Chair, I think my comment would be that that's part of what our school support team is doing, is helping them manage and making sure that they aren't, spending money for the sake of spending money, so to speak. But also, I think it's important to remember too, that when the school budget allocation is given to a principal at the beginning of the year, that they're supposed to work with their staffing and their school council and work on this, based on their school improvement plan and student achievement, on developing a plan to use those monies to support that. And I don't think, for the most part, we didn't see a great number of people trying to spend it, use it, or lose it type of mentality. And that's part of the reason why we picked 25%, because if we'd gone to zero, it would have been a lot different. And that's why we thought it was reasonable to say 25%, because if they aren't using 75% of their budget already, that's a concern. We will reevaluate, 3 or 4 years and see if it should be 20% or up to 30%. But we felt that 25% was a reasonable, so we didn't have people trying to spend not supporting a plan that supported student achievement and well-being.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee McLean. Trustee Erhard, go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, just quickly, I'm wondering if it might be possible to get some of the tables in the appendix, either as a spreadsheet where we could sort it, or if it could get grouped by totals and by ward. It was sent alphabetically, and for me that I'd like to see it in different formats if possible. Could we get that through Trustees Weekly?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thanks very much. It was appendices B and E. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Erhard. Trustee Dawson?
Thank you. And through the chair, I actually was going to ask the same thing as Trustee Erhard, but I do have one other question. I have a school on here, and it's in Appendix E. It appears to be the highest on the list. And I know for a fact that the school generated funds surplus is not the correct number. So I was just wondering what goes into that number. Can you explain that in a little more detail? Because it's showing that Rawlinson has, which is my kid's school, has $73,000 in school generated surplus funds. And that's not what we've had reported at our school council meeting. So I'm just wondering why the discrepancy.
Go ahead. I'll ask Comptroller Stephanie Harris to answer that for you.
So we're happy to take a look into this specific school as an example, but in the school generated funds number is the parent council amount as well as funds that the school has collected directly. So that may explain the difference that you're seeing. So for example, schools collect for field trips or yearbooks or other funds. So to the extent those items have been generated but not dispersed, they're also part of this number in addition to the school council amounts. But
okay,
certainly
that's actually really helpful. That makes a lot more sense now. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Dawson. Thank you, Stephanie. Can we open the vote? I need a mover and seconder for the item, please. Trustee Cherneslin and Trustee McLean.
And in favor.
McLean in favor.
And it carries. Moving along, item 5.4, Student Device 101 Program. And who's speaking on this?
Thank you. Through the chair, I will begin, and then Executive Officer Singh is also here to respond to questions. So the one-to-one device program was implemented in 21-22 to provide Chromebooks to all students in grades 5 to 12. We're currently in year 3 of that program. So that means that students that wish to have a device in grades 5 through 7 and 9 through 11 currently have a device. The cost of the program has been approximately $8 to $9 million a year, including the cost of the device and also repairs to the devices. And this is outlined in chart 2 of the report, page 74 of the package. And in the past, we have paid for the devices in the summer before the school year. So the devices for 22-23, the year that we're currently in, were paid through last year's budget. And so through the budget process, the board passed a motion wanting to realign the expense with the year that the devices were actually being distributed to students. So that, in essence, provided a one-year pause in the expenditure for the year that we're currently in. The board did pass a motion in June that asked us to bring back a report on the one-to-one device to program, a plan be included to restructure the program to purchase the devices in the year that they are being distributed to students. So as a part of reviewing the program, we also wanted to look at ways to reduce the impact on budget. And there are only really two ways to reduce the impact on budget. One is to reduce the number of devices that we purchase, so reduce the cost. Or two is to increase the funding or find ways of using existing funding. So when we look at the number of devices that we purchase, we already have a requirement to opt into the program. And so we would expect that students who are opting in are students that require the devices. So to change that in any significant way would, I don't think, be serving the students that may require these devices in order to participate in this learning. So based on our previous experience, and you'll see this in that chart as well, we expect approximately 80% of the projected enrollment to be opting into the program for 24-25. So that's where our expenditure is based on. And so on the revenue side, there are three things that staff are considering. One is the use of school budgets, one is the use of other funding, and two is looking for contributions from families. So with regards to the first one, the school budgets, the previous report that we just had provided detail with the amount provided to schools and what the budgets are intended to cover. And the chart on page 3 of the report, page 76, shows the spending by school on Chromebooks over the past 5 years. And you can see, and as should be expected, other than during COVID when we were supporting remote learning and providing devices to any student who required them, there's been a decrease in the number of devices purchased at the school. So we would expect this number to continue to decrease as students are being provided with these devices centrally. At the same time, we have not made any corresponding reductions in school budget allocations related to these devices being provided centrally. So you'll see the costs decreasing significantly that are being paid for out of school budgets, and yet no corresponding decrease in the school budget. So that's why we're looking at school budgets as a possible source in helping to contribute to the cost of the program. When we look at other funding, we just want to ensure that we're maximizing the use of funding that may have some specific restrictions attached to them, but that these devices fit into those restrictions. And in some cases, we may not have always spent all of the funding that we've received. So again, we just want to maximize and use funding appropriately and make sure that we are using it in some cases to offset costs when it relates to again, specific students that can be, and devices that can be purchased through those funding sources. And then the last one, and I guess this is where we are looking for some feedback. Cost of devices are about $300, and students have access to the device for 4 years. So a student gets a device in grade 5, they give it back in grade 8, and then they get a new one in grade 9, give it back in grade 12. So we're just asking to explore a contribution from families for students who choose to opt into the program. Obviously, equity of access would be part of the consideration and something that we would have to look at how we would ensure that the contribution would not be a barrier to receiving the device. And that's for the actual purchase of the device. The other part that we're exploring, and I think some schools may have started to do this already, is language in the agreements to empower schools to seek contributions related to repair costs. So we have some devices that are coming back 1, 2, 3, or more times, sometimes even obviously intentionally damaged. And right now, the board is taking on those costs. So again, we'd just like to explore looking at some way to recoup some of those costs when we're looking at multiple devices being damaged and sometimes very obviously intentional. So we're looking at the strategies optimally in order to help us moving forward. We'd look at September 2024, but depending on the feedback that we receive, we may have to look at some sort of timeline to implement. And we have already, again, the cost is about $8 million, 8.5 million that we're looking at. We've only included 5 million in the projected deficit because we expect to be able to recoup 3.5 million in other areas of the budget. So if we weren't able to do some of these things, we would actually have to increase the cost associated with the one-to-one program. So I'm going to close there. I'm going to ask Executive Officer Singh if he'd like to add anything, and then we can answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Associate Director Zucker, through the chair. The only piece I wanted to add is that when we came out of the COVID, we clearly saw the data, there was a gap and there was a digital divide across the system. I remember shipping around 90,000 devices during the pandemic to the families. And I think there was a will in the board at that time. We don't want to have this repeated. We want to make sure we are ready for the next generation of learning spaces. And that's where the one-on-one program was born. And now you can see also part of the bring your own device, the 1/5 of the kids in grade 5 and 9 are actually bringing their own device. So it's 80% we need to support. And we have seen extreme differences across our school system itself too. And this program really helps us to close that digital divide that has existed for years. And it's amazing some of the emails you receive from parents who actually need these devices in their households. In some cases, the investment we make in the learners' education through this device is actually the only device the family has to connect online. So as a board, we're investing into the digital transformation of the entire family. And that's another perspective I want to make sure the board understands as we look at this program itself too. And in parallel to that, we also on the side worked with our local telcos to offer us a good price on offering a cheap internet services to the families who need it. In some cases, we actually cover the cost centrally to pay for that internet. And to me, we just do a little bit of a fundraising with our service providers to cover that cost. So this is a whole environment to really make sure every learner from grade 5 to 12 has a digital tool and they can actually connect online wherever they are, at school, at home. And I wanted to share that in some cases, the service providers and telco has offered to install free Wi-Fi in the local shelters too. So if a kid and family ends up in a space for a few weeks, they still have connectivity. So it's entire ecosystem we've been working behind the scenes to foster this program. I'll take a pause, and if there are any additional questions for us, thank you.
Thank you, Executive Officer Peter Singh. We do have a speakers list. We'll start with Trustee Lee.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for not being on camera. I was just in a bad spot right now. I do appreciate the report from staff, and I do think this is a very important program for us to continue. Having devices and being able to use computers and computing devices is a crucial skill that we have to teach our students. It is not an option. They will need it to be successful, and we should not let this success be contingent upon a student's economic situation. With that being said, I do appreciate the fact that we need to control cost and we need to hold students responsible for taking care of these devices. I believe the reason why we give these devices to students after grade 5 is that our leaders, our staff members have deemed that this is an age where students can be predictively held responsible to take care of these devices. So we need to make sure that that responsibility is taken. And I also believe that this can be a crucial step in their education as well. And to the point where staff members has made to say, do we implement the program where instead of saying we provide free devices, then to say that we provide heavily subsidized devices, perhaps a loan with a nominal monthly rent or yearly rent. I do think this is a good idea, but I do think when we implement this, we should also have a program to say if a family really needs help, we should have a mechanism to really help those families. So my question to staff is, when can we see a proposal on how they would like to change the program? I know the associate director mentioned it briefly, but I don't think I caught a date.
Thank you, Trustee Lee.
Through the chair. Sorry, there's a little bit of feedback here. We do, based on the feedback that we received today, we are prepared to bring something back to trustees to consider before the budget process is complete, so before the March 26th. We have already been looking at the cost, but we just wanted to hear feedback to determine what our proposal could and should be.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I really appreciate the Associate Director for that. One thing that I do not support, and I wish staff would do everything they can to avoid, is to further impact school budget to pay for this particular program. The context to the entire conversation is during the year that we started implementing this program, we already cut school budgets by 5%. And the discussion we had there was already based on the premise that schools do not have to spend as much money on devices, and therefore a part of their budget is being removed to pay for the program. Our school budgets are used for student education. They're being used for student well-being, and they're being used largely for equity purposes as well. We don't think our principals should have less money to educate our kids. I think we need to find ways to pay for this program elsewhere. So my question back to staff is, how likely do you think we can continue this program with proposals for modifications without impacting school budgets?
Thank you, Trustee. Associate Director Zucker.
Thank you. So Trustee Lee, I'm just confirming you're asking how we would be able to continue with this program without impacting school budgets?
Just from your presentation through Mr. Chair to the Associate Director, you mentioned that you may have to consider school budgets. Can I get a clarification on whether you have to reduce school budgets, or is there a way to not impact school budgets?
Thank you. And sorry, you're coming through a little scramble, but I think I understand the question. So what I'll say is that, again, based on the feedback, we may bring back multiple options for trustees to look at based on what we're hearing, because I don't think that we'll necessarily come to consensus this evening, but may look at different options that include school budgets, that don't include school budgets. And we'll be able to, again, have different scenarios based on the feedback.
Thank you. I would highly encourage staff to provide proposals without an option that will impact school budgets, just because I do not think this is in service to educating our students better. Those are all my comments and questions. Thank you to everyone on the staff team who worked on this. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Lee. Trustee Diravitis.
Thank you, Chair. First, want to thank staff for bringing this report, and also appreciate the sort of two-step method that they brought in to try and get some feedback, and their appreciation for the difficulty of finding the right balance on this. I just have a couple of points to make. First of all, I very much support the program. I have a number of I've had a number of conversations with school councils, and a number of other folks around the importance of this program. So I want to communicate to my colleagues, to staff, and that are working on this, that in some of the schools with the highest LOI scores, that was just at a school council at Yorkwoods just the other day, and the subject came up around access to tech, and around access to some of this. And as Trustee V was mentioning, schools having to use their own budget to sort of try and meet some gaps within the program that we do have. And the issue came up around funding and how it can be purchased. So my 2 cents on what I would like to see that would allow us to continue to have a program that is helpful is that, yes, you can have a measure of accountability from families, from parents, by having them pay some type of fee, ideally a refundable fee of some type, to ensure that the devices are taken care of. But then to keep in mind that, different households have different levels of ability, that in a household with one child, the fee will have a certain value. In a household with 2, 3, 4 or more children, that same fee may have a different value. And then that the mistake that I've seen with these type of programs in the past is that if we make the process heavy on the front end, it makes it really difficult for people to access it properly, right? So you have the welcome policy at the City of Toronto. I think it's full of barriers and full of issues, and it was really only implemented because there was a shortage of funding. So we need to avoid that, I think, to allow families to be able to access the program first, and then deal with the issues of equities and access. So if we can have that as the main prism through which we look at the program, equity of access, then it makes the rest of the formula work better. And that's through the chair, that's my main comment on the issue. I'm excited to see staff work through the problem of making sure that we can afford this program. But this is something that isn't sort of directly funded through GSN, but it's something that we can be proud of, that allows greater access, allows greater opportunities to many families that otherwise won't have it. And the last image I want to leave my colleagues with is having seen some reports of parents and families through COVID that didn't have access to internet at home, having to sort of hang out at a McDonald's in order to get Wi-Fi because they couldn't afford internet at home in order to be able to do their homework. That the sort of life experiences that some families have are very, very, very different. And then for us to sort of try and balance out some of these opportunities, that we do have to make these type of investments and fully support the program, fully support the opportunities the program creates for many of our parents, and I'm waiting to see what the final report will look like, but look forward to supporting this through our budget process as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Diravitis. Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I too support this program, and I really appreciated Mr. Singh's comments on why. And I think it's really important to stand behind. I'm troubled, however, by the repairs and the fact that some devices go missing. So I am wondering if there is a role for schools here. I'm wondering if potentially staff might consider a deposit for the devices. Potentially, maybe that deposit comes out of school budgets. I'm just brainstorming here. If in fact families can't afford it, I'm wondering, because it's a 4-year program, if there should be a check-in after each of the years of the program, just to make sure the devices are in good working order. And other things to try and minimize or maximize their value to the students and their families. Anyway, I do understand this comes at a cost. I do understand it's worth spending money on, but I am open to understanding if there is a percentage that can be recouped from the board's bottom line budget. So I don't have anything more to contribute than that. I'm in favor, and I appreciate looking at some ways to support the program without causing impact to families, because that would be self-defeatist in the whole notion behind the program. So thank you, staff.
Thank you, Trustee Luskin. Trustee Chernoslin.
Thank you. I'm really committed to this program. I think this is like providing, I see this as akin to providing the basics of education for kids in a 21st century learning environment. It's the same, it to me has the same importance of providing desks and chairs and a library and all these different kind of things. This is the basics of what's necessary in education today. And I think it ensures not just that all kids have access, which is supremely important as has been discussed today, but also that the whole system has access to technology and is forced to learn to deal with all of that technology, because that's what we're preparing kids for when they go off to university or to post-secondary or into the job market or wherever they're going in the world. So I feel like I'm so proud of, I really want to say I'm so proud of this program. We started talking about it several years ago at the beginning of at the very, very outset of the pandemic. And part of the discussions I remember having with staff were around how do we get everybody comfortable working in a virtual environment. It was that we had to have access to it. You couldn't have a classroom that had a cart part of the time, so that you were only using it 1 month out of every 4 or every 5. So I see this as something to be so proud of. And when I talk to trustees and other boards, not all boards have this, and it maybe isn't as, maybe it's not as crucial a piece or not a priority, but I think it really has to be a priority for our board, given the great diversity in the city of Toronto in terms of access to having a device. So I'm firmly committed to this. I do wonder, boards that are loaning devices, and there are many that do, have we talked to them about what they do in terms of whether they require a deposit, whether they require a fee, a nominal fee? And I imagine that if we were to do a fee, it would be a nominal one. But I guess my first question for staff is, have we done a scan of even the GTA boards?
Through the chair, Trustee, yes, we did actually do the market scan and see what models are working. And for example, one of the school boards in the east of us, they actually start the device program in grade 7. and they issue a new one in grade 10. So over 6 years program, so they actually use the device for 3 years. Our program starts in grade 5 and grade 5 and 9. So we are actually able to get 4 years of each device itself. We also looked at the model if we need to put some money down as a deposit. That was how will we manage that program? Like who's deposited? How will we collect that money? How will we refund that money? You can see the whole accounting logistics behind it. How do you manage that? Even if it's a minimum, you say $50, $40, $25. End of the day, you have to do an accounting exercise to bring funds in and refund. And how do we convince school staff to now chase a family for funds, right? So logistical pieces around it. I think with this program, what we're proposing now is if the parent says, yes, I want my child to be enrolled in this program, here's my commitment to the program. I'm just going to throw a number like $40. That's $10 per year for the 4 years commitment. And that pool of money can be used now to cover the costs for repairs. Because repairs are not cheap. Even we cover the repair cost from a staff point of view. Simple example, a damaged screen is $125 in parts. Our staff will spend 45 minutes replacing and repairing it. That's staff time. And we haven't even added the travel time for staff to go from a building to go grab or work on that device on school itself too. So you can see very quickly that small damage of $125 might translate into almost close to $300 for the TDSB when you add the travel time and everything else over it. So there is a cost attached to it. I think we need to think about it. How can we convince parents to have the way we call in golf, skin in the game? So they know if the kid's going to be damaging the device, they're on hook for it. So they want to pay extra attention to it. So that's the intent here. And we're hoping there will be some interest in that. We do want some funding to come in from the parent side, having a skin in the game as we're investing in their child for the next 4 years. Not even 4 years, literally 8 years from 5 to 12. And that will cost them less than $100 to have an access to a device. Thank you.
So thank you for that. Just to clarify, do we have any information on how neighboring boards are, what fees they're requesting from parents? I appreciate the 3 years, and we're working on a 4-year. But I just wondered, in the scan, have we learned of any programs they're doing in terms of financial recuperation and what's working, what's not working?
We haven't seen that in the GTA school boards, but we did see some school boards in the US where they had at least minimum $25. And they actually were looking at the repairs. The first time you bring it in, we're going to charge you $25 for repairs. Next time, it goes up to $50. And third time, you cover the entire cost of the repair. So they actually went towards the repair replacement payment cost instead of the initial deposit cost itself too. So that's what we learned from the US side.
Okay, thank you. That's an interesting approach because it encourages people looking after the devices. And I wonder if that might be something we might look at and can just even to consider with obviously parameters around equity and families that would be, might present a barrier, but it might not present a barrier for every family. And if, I do think like it's concerning to hear that there's repeated intentional damage to our devices. That's concerning to me. I'm looking forward to when we get more information back about what staff are thinking, because I do think we have to find a way to make this work financially, but also to continue doing it absolutely. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Chenuslin. Trustee Hastings? Trustee Hastings? Okay.
Sorry about that. It's called playing around with the speaker. I have a number. I don't know if I call it a number of concerns or a number of questions. You speak of broken units. You speak of intentional broken units. How do we know that these units are intentionally broken? Second part is, have you thought about, because I've got a couple of groups in my neighborhood, my ward, that's working with, they are working with kids. They are working with kids and refurbished machines. Have you thought about having any of that idea towards the kids? Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff.
Thank you, Trustee Hastings.
Through the chair to Trustee Hastings, we looked at the refurbished compute 10 years ago, and we actually consulted the entities who were actually leveraging those programs in GTA. The refurbished program is basically built around Windows ecosystem. And our 101 program is actually baked around Chrome OS environment. And we do not buy used Chromebooks. We believe $300 is a reasonable cost for a brand new device, which can be used well for a learner for 4 years. Our intent wasn't to bring in a device which will cost us a lot more to install operating systems, try to protect with antivirus on it, and then maintain it. And we will be flooded with multiple flavors of technology. We always go with a specific set of vendors, so we actually maintain the software packages for that particular platform. So instead of having a cocktail of devices, we have established standards across our entire ecosystem over the years. So that's the reason why we don't bring in Windows refurbished machines off the street. We're able to offer a quality device to our students at a cost of $300, which is a very good device for the next 4 years. I believe that's a rock solid investment in kids' learning.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the superintendent. I would like to, again, I'm working with a number of groups in my ward. I would like to sit down and speak with, along with my groups, to the superintendent, if that is okay, and that's okay with the superintendent. Mr. Chair?
Yes. Do you have a question, Trustee Hastings, or it's a comment?
That was the question. No comment. It's a question. I would like to sit down with the superintendent and my group of people that are working in the neighborhood with, again, as he calls it, refurbished machines. Because I'm pretty sure we can come up with something that's not a mishmash of, as you say, operating systems.
So Trustee Hastings, you can always reach out to your superintendent if you have any questions.
I'm going to reach out here to make an appointment there.
We do not have
and the person I'm
superintendent.
going to be talking to is
Trustee Hastings.
Yes, sir.
We do not have superintendent right now. You can always reach them.
Then I'm going to
do you have a
very
comment?
specific.
Through the chair, I wanted to make an offer that Trustee Hastings, you're always welcome to secure a time slot to chat and let your trustee service or board services know. We will put a time slot together and come out wherever we need to meet and sit down, have a good discussion on, and explore all possibilities. Thank you very much for bringing this option to the table.
Thank you.
I will come. Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Trustee Hastings.
I will not have I will not have the executive superintendent travel around the city. We will come to him. If that's okay with the executive.
All right, point
And
taken,
still,
Trustee
I have
Hastings.
one more question.
Go ahead.
How are you identifying intentional damage?
Through the chair, we have seen imprints of a hammer, stomping footprints on a device. We have seen devices where they've been thrown into a wall. We have seen devices thrown down a chute. I can just give you tons of other examples how we identify these are intentionally damaged devices. And
I'd love to hear about that.
you're hearing it right now. So that's
I
what
know
we
I'm
have been
hearing about it
experiencing.
now. I'd like to, again, I'll make an appointment to come to your office, through you, Mr. Chair, and with my group of people that I'm dealing with, because a lot of us can't afford $300. A lot of us can't afford, we can't afford a machine. And to tell you the truth, I've never seen, you probably have, I've never seen a machine hammered, kicked down a chute, and dropped and stomped on intentionally. And I deal with a lot of machines. I thank you for your time, and I will do exactly as you've asked. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Hastings. Trustee Erard.
Thanks very much. And also thanks so much for staff comments just around the program. It's very inspirational. It's really exciting to hear. I have some questions, and they're kind of in a few areas, because I think the purpose of this report is in the context of finance, budget, and enrollment committee. So it's around funding the program. But a lot of my questions are really about the broad outcomes of the program and how and challenges with the program, opportunities with the program. And so I'm wondering if we have any slated updates or programs or program updates or program reviews going to other committees around the one-to-one device program. Was that envisioned when it first came into place, or do we have something scheduled to take place?
Executive Officer Peter Singh.
I missed the question as the trustee was sharing some details. Could you please share
Trustee
the
Hart,
question
can you
again?
repeat the question?
Yes, no problem. I'm wondering if when the program was put in place, if we had stated a review period for the program around its outcomes. So not just around funding the program, but on the outcomes to more broadly to student achievement and well-being.
Through the chair, we did not have a research piece attached to this program. I think this was an outcome from pandemic days, and the board's intent was that we don't want to be caught short again if we are in another pandemic or even in this extreme weather situation where we have to switch from on-prem to virtual learning. I think that was some of the thinking how this program started. So there wasn't any intent to review after a year or 2 years, but there was definitely a lot of questions around finding sustainable funding model. And that's why we are here in front of you today, looking for direction and advising how can we actually establish a sustainable funding model to continue this program.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll say quickly that I echo some of the comments of other trustees around looking at the funding opportunities. I have concerns around models where parents are being asked to pay or caregivers due to the potential for inequitable outcomes or barriers of access to the program. I also want to make sure that we clarify if the intention of repair fees is primarily to recoup costs or primarily to reduce damage. And so just to make sure we're clear on that, not knowing, not having a quantification of how much damage, it's hard to envision if there would be much that would come back financially in that. And so I'd want to make sure that we're not unduly penalizing. I'd want to get staff advice on that through the process. I do want to ask though, because in reading this report, I really found myself wondering about broad-based program outcomes. And what clicked me into that was the notion that textbooks are no longer needed because we have the devices. And we have received as a board reports around impacts on screen time, significant hours of screen time on students, and how that impacts their mental health and well-being. We also received lots of board reports around cost for licensing fees related to software programs. And I received a lot of concerns from parents regarding inappropriate content being accessed on TDSB devices, both during class time and outside of class time. So I in no way in asking these questions want to challenge the importance of access to technology. What I would like to better understand is how are we managing the use of the technology and the introduction of widespread mainstream devices in our classrooms, and how does that in terms of a program and its contribution to student achievement and well-being. So that's something that I'm very interested in seeing at board at some point. And I'd love some early comments on any of that, really, just because I'm concerned if we only look at it as a funding perspective and not on a program and services committee basis as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Arhat. Executive Officer Peter Singh, and then Madam Director wants to comment on this.
Through you, Chair, I wanted to share some of the things where we talked about how are we building system capacity to leverage the investments we're making in the technology. I wanted to share with the trustee, you have seen a report that comes annually around Digital Lead Learners Program, DLL, which is close to 300 teachers who are digitally fluent, and we work with them to build system capacity over the years. And I think it's been almost 9 or 10 years that program has been running. So these teachers go back to their own schools, their own learning networks to facilitate learning for other teachers. We have an annual tech camp that happens. In the past, we used to call it Google Camps. Now it's technology camps. And we've been also doing our Unleashing Learning conference every year. And this year will be our 6th year. If we count COVID, 3 years would have been the 9th year of it. So there have been multiple avenues to build system capacity. And there's a lot of centrally assigned leaders or principals and coaches who also continue to facilitate that learning at a school level. So there's a continuous efforts behind the scenes to build teachers' capacity so they understand how to actually leverage technology as part of their pedagogy. And our intent with the one-to-one device program was, can we eliminate that dependency where the teacher is struggling that I don't have enough devices. My students are all on a different environments and different platforms. I have to spend time helping them logging in. Can we just get into an environment as a teacher, I walk into a room with technology just available as electricity is in the room. And the online collaborative platforms like Brightspace or Google Classroom or Microsoft ecosystem are all available in real time. And we have enough internet capacity at each school, each classroom to connect these right now over 200,000 devices in the classroom with no interruption and things like that. So these layers of, I will say, capacity building work efforts have been going on for years and years. And some of the programs and outcomes you see that come at the year end to you from leadership and learning is all connected to the investments we're making here. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Officer Peter Singh. Madam Director.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, if I could just add in response to the trustees' questions around digital citizenship as well as screen time, Those are aspects of what we will explore through the cell phone resolution that was passed at the previous board meeting. So we will be looking at screen time. Some of our students access digital learning on their phones, some on the computers we provide or their own computers. So this will be part of what we explore as we do consultations to fulfill the requirements of that motion. I would also like to address if we had a time for review. We are certainly open to discussing when the review period should be with the board. I think the thought was technology changes quickly, and as the technology evolves, we would reassess what is required, what we should be providing, the prevalence of technology among all of our families. But we certainly should be looking at a program evaluation framework, which I hope we will have in place for the next school year, so that we can look at all of our programs, including this one, on a regular basis to begin to understand the value that it is offering to our students in terms of their learning and their access.
Thank you, Madam Director.
Through the chair, I just wanted to circle back. There was a question on the floor around how the neighboring school boards are also dealing with it. So a bit of information came in I thought was important. School board east of us actually takes money from the school budget as part of their one-to-one strategy. So there is existing practice around us, I will use the word dipping into school budgets. And we also have to look at it that after 4 years of investment, in high school, there's no need to buy a device for a learner because every student will have access to technology at a high school level. So I think we need to rethink about it. Do we have a similar common model for elementary and secondary schools, or we focus more on high schools? Because in secondary side, it's grade 5 to 8. So grade 1 to 4 don't have technology investment, and school will need to invest in their program. It could be early years program where they might have to buy iPads for JKSQ and grade 1s. So that's another option to explore. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Officer. We have Trustee Arts.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I really like the idea of a graduated penalty for that, and I think that if we aren't going to apply school budgets to buying devices, that we do need to have some sort of guidance and programming, because we do give schools budgets for technology specifically to spend on technology. So if they're no longer buying devices, then they at least need some guidance on spending that, because I wouldn't want the not having to pay for devices anymore to contribute to the ongoing issues of schools not spending their budgets as well. So to help in what they could use them for. But I think maybe directing the first repairs through the school's budget would also invest the school in, it would be like a shared investment in taking care of devices. And then charging for repeat offenses, I think is perfectly reasonable. Maybe this is far-fetched, but the children I know who are hard on devices, their parents buy these giant rubber cases, and those stay on the devices. So when the kids chuck them across the room and step on them, which I know kids do, it actually protects the device. So I don't know if we have the option to make it mandatory for repeat offenders to put their Chromebooks in an otter case or whatever the equivalent of an otter case is for a Chromebook. Preferably something loud and embarrassing. So the other piece with the fees for parents, I'm supportive of exploring that model. I was just wondering about, we had, when we launched the one-to-one device program, we had a
fundraising campaign that went by the same name that used to live on our landing page as a help contribute to our one-to-one device program. And I believe we still take donations for technology, but that campaign seems to have gone away. I note that last year, my youngest school, when they do fundraising for events or purchases of some sort, so they do Spiritware, they started a new community program. And they give you the option. So if you're buying a school t-shirt for your child, they give you the option of buying one for another child. So that's if you're, buying a $20 t-shirt for your kid, would you also like to contribute some money towards buying one for someone else who can't afford it? And it goes into the school's community fund. So they call it the Beaumont Community Fund. If you're buying tickets for the fun fair, would you like to buy tickets for another student? So I wonder if that's something that we could explore with the since I assume we're going to be sending parents an online form that they could fill out with the opt-in. Can you contribute to the device? Can you contribute to someone else's device? With the explanation of this is not funded by the province. It costs us $300 to provide this device. It would be great for equity of access as a fundraising piece to also buy one for a student in need. I think that bringing back our fundraising campaign in a more intentional way for the one-to-one device program would certainly not be accessible to everyone, but would work for a lot of families.
Thank you. Trustee Arts, Executive Officer.
Through the chair, I just want to say thank you for tabling those additional ideas. We're going to take it back to the team to explore what's possible there. And the fundraising program still continues, but it's a little bit dormant. We haven't been able to ramp up, and that will be one goal on our side to just ramp up again. If you can reach out to all our families who can contribute to it, that will be even great. Thank you.
Trustee Arts, good, thank you. I do have some questions, so Trustee McLean, can I pass on the chair?
Go ahead, Trustee Patel.
Thank you, Chair. To you, Mr. Chair, I'm in complete favor of this one-on-one device program, but do I have some questions of clarification? What I'm seeing on page 74 of the agenda, I need a clarification on this. So projection of number of students out there. I'd like to understand what is the projection of number of devices.
So the chair, we took the projection from our planning department's numbers, saying what's possible, and we just took 80% of that one, seeing the trend over the past years. So we just went by 80% of what's projected.
80%, okay. Thank you. So through you, Mr. Chair, do we have any inventories? Because what I'm seeing on page 75 of the agenda, we have 78,800 units purchased by the school budget. How many additional devices do we have in terms of inventory?
So through the chair, on the previous chart, you can see part of the 101 program, what we bought in 21-22. We had 27,547 devices, and same 29,000 plus on 22-23 and 27,652 on the third. So we have the data on that too. We also, what you're seeing on the second chart is what we track, everything that goes through our SAP system. And we extract this data every Monday to see what schools are spending money on. What you see in front of it is just the list of Chromebooks they bought. Schools still bought additional laptops, Windows. They still bought desktops for some of the labs. And so this is not the total spend. Looking at the past experience over beyond even 2018 and 19, I can tell you that when we were allocating around $3 million centrally to the school budgets to buy technology, every year schools were spending between $8 to $9 million. So beyond what we were giving them, they were still spending additional $6 million every single year. So that trend of 8 to 9 million average spend is actually norm as a district. If you look at overall strategy, you can think we're just moving strategy from the schools to central. But when I look at the overall data for almost last 10 years, 8 to 9 million has been our annual burn, overall technology burn across the district.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I still need to have a clarification on, do we have an inventory data of how many devices are Chromebooks devices to the students, staff, whatever it is? I just need an inventory. Do we have an inventory of that?
Yes, we do track all our assets and every device we buy, and the entire life cycle is maintained from buying to until it leaves for junkyard. So we actually track all assets for their entire life cycle at TDSB.
So through the chair, just to add, we can bring back that information when we bring back the report, because the numbers are quite high. I think that trustees may find that information interesting to help make the decisions with regards to school budgets.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, $300 includes repair cost, or it's just for the device cost?
This is just for the device cost.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair.
Which includes shipping and delivering to the school.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, would staff consider giving parents an installment of 4 years of this $300?
Through the chair, we were looking for direction from this table, what's possible, and I think all ideas needs to be explored. And we are now looking for $300 investment from the parents. I think what we are more thinking about, how can be it divvied up with a little bit investment from the parents, but can schools help out? And then the additional help can be centrally to cover the overall $300 of the cost, which is good for 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's all from me for now. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, and I'll return the chair to you.
Thank you, Trustee McLean. We have Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Some of the questions my colleagues asked has spurred something in me, so I need to know from staff. Does the province fund technology for students?
So through the chair, through the Grant for Student Needs, there is an allocation for technology as part of the People Foundation grant. It doesn't necessarily say specifically for students, but it is to support education. So there is an amount in the GSN for technology. We use that funding to support purchase of technology, but also the hardware that's required to support the technology that we buy. So, you know, all of the connections that we need in internet and security and all the other things that come along with purchasing a device.
Appreciate that. Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. Have we ever advocated for the province to supply a one-to-one device program for students across the province? I was just struck by when Trustee Chernislin spoke about, you know, having technology in your classroom is necessary. It's the same as having a desk, for example. So I'm just wondering if we have ever directly asked the province. I know in our GSN submissions, I'm not sure, so I'm just asking staff if we have ever asked them directly to fund a one-to-one device program. And if we haven't, as a business arising, I'd like to move that the chair write a letter and copy OPSPA. But first I'd like to hear from staff. Thank you.
Craig, do you want to answer this?
Chair, previous boards, we have in some of our submissions, whether it be through our GSN consultation, talked about the benchmark didn't move for several years. We have never, I don't believe, directly said to one, but we have address that the benchmark for several years did move the per pupil amount.
Thank you. I'd like to hear from staff through you, Mr. Chair, what appropriate wording would be, because if I just say one-to-one device, it sounds like I'm potentially asking for a device for every child every year. So I am just wondering about the appropriate language, and because this is pretty last minute, I'm maybe wondering if staff don't have an answer for me now, I'm wondering through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, if I could move a motion that staff consider language, or the chair considers language, so it's not fully baked. I'm just looking for some direction, Mr. Chair, to staff.
Thank you, Trustee Laston. Associate Director Zucker.
Thank you, and through the chair, we'd be happy to provide some further language to support the letter, but understand the gist of what you're looking for.
I'm wondering, through you, Mr. Chair, to governance staff then, is it appropriate, because I don't have the language in front of me, not to move anything now, but at board, if I remove this item from the consent agenda and added the wording then? I'm just seeking some direction through you, Mr. Chair, to staff.
Dan?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Either path would be a possible way to go in the interest of perhaps ease of process for tonight, because we don't want to craft things on the fly and if we don't need to necessarily, and we're not under a time crunch. The latter might be better, to withdraw from the consent, and then it could be brought out at that table.
Thank you very much. I think that's what the plan should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Laston. Go ahead.
Sorry, and I just want to add, I just checked to make sure in our response to the consultation on funding, we do say increase funding to support a one-to-one device strategy for all students. So it has been mentioned specifically through that document, but not as a larger whole.
Thank you, Associate Director Zucker. We have Trustee Chanslin.
Thank you. Okay, so two things that popped into my head during the course of this meeting as listening to my colleagues, and the issue around, I just wanted to think about that issue of secondary school budgets, and Mr. Singh brought up sort of the fact that we're providing devices for everybody in secondary school, and so perhaps that doesn't need to be there isn't a need for additional technology purposes in secondary school. I'm not sure that's true. Just from observing when I've been in secondary schools, I know they've had to upgrade their computer labs, particularly if they're, I'm not sure a Chromebook, because we provide a Chromebook, and I'm not sure a Chromebook has all the capability that some of our high school students might be doing in terms of some of the artistic kind of stuff that I just, I don't know, complex programs. I don't know, but I think that would need some more investigation to really understand and unpack what our secondary schools are using those tech budgets for and what their computer labs look like. And I know we don't tend to do computer labs like we used to think of when we were kids, but I know there are arts-based ones and cyber arts kind of stuff that is being done in schools. So just something for us to think about there. I wanted to add I really loved the Bowmore idea of buy yours, or if you're buying a shirt, buy one, for a friend in need kind of thing. But I also wonder if we could take that one step further, and of course this is something just brainstorming in its infancy, and I'm sure staff will take it back, but families who don't need a device might be willing to sponsor a device for somebody else. So even if you're not buying a device or not renting a device, when you get that form as a TDSB parent, it says, are you requesting a device or do you not need a device? a third option might be, I don't need a device, but I'd be happy to contribute towards somebody else's device, because those might be the families who might be in a position to contribute to this fund as well. So that's just sort of like taking it, I just think we should take it even to the next step if we're doing it. Because you might get families who have that ability. I also wonder if there aren't, I wonder if there might not be donors on this kind of thing. And I know we don't necessarily always want to go there, but I do wonder about that on technology, because I know it's the kind of thing that some people in their business might be able to help us with. Although I know we're trying to keep it very consistent with the type of device. And I know we don't want 6,000 types. I know we just want Chromebooks. I understand that, but I just wonder if there might be a place for that. So I think it might be worth reviving some of the fundraising approaches that we're using on this item. Although I don't discount going to the province for funding on this either. And I feel like we have asked the province about a one-to-one device funding. I feel like there have been motions that we have done before, but I just can't think of them off the top of my head. But I feel like we have spoken about this with them. Anyways, and I guess I would also wonder with OBSPA if there might be something they'd be interested in, because I think this is something that province-wide would be important. Anyways, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Chanoslin. Trustee Dan McLean, go ahead.
Thank you, and through the chair. I just had a question for Executive Officer Singh based on the questions from Trustee Arts. Have we ever considered, like the protective cases for iPads and whatnot are reasonably inexpensive, and if we were, buying them en masse, you would think that we could get them at a reasonable price. Have we ever kind of thought of the risk reward in terms of the investment of doing that up front? So that instead of having really conscientious parents, do that we might be able to make a small investment in this regard and yet save us on the back end with some of the natural, the whole throwing against the wall thing, aside. I've been known to drop my iPad periodically. Like, it's beneficial to have it. Have we thought about that kind of risk-reward evaluation?
To the chair, we do have those, I'll say the covers in our catalog, and we actually leave that option with the schools. Centrally, we try to lower our cost, and just think about 8.5 million stolen literally turns into $9.2 million kind of thing, right? So we actually brought those options to our catalog, and the school can decide saying, yes, we want to actually buy these additional pieces as part of our investment. And in some cases, the schools were even asking us, can I buy a charging cart, right? So if the kid forgot to charge the device, they will be able to do it at the school. Can I invest in a charging cart and things like that one? So we brought all those options to the catalog, and depending on what the need of the school is, they can actually opt into that program, right? But if you look at it overall centrally, that are we going to do all those pieces up here, the cost will continue to go up, because every time you decide to add something, it will be $10, $15, $20, $30, $40 to each device as we build the program. Thank you.
Okay, well, you're paying more for your protective cases than I am, but okay, notwithstanding, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee McLean. Do we have anybody else on the list?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay, good. Can we have a mover and seconder for this item? Trustee Arts, Trustee McLean. Can you open the vote?
Trustee Leith in favor.
McLean in favor.
I'm not getting it. Okay.
Trustee Leovitis in favor.
stand in favor.
Trustee Hassan?
I voted online. Trustee Hassan in favor.
Trustee Lee?
Voted in favor. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Lee. We good? And it carries. Item 5.5, potential areas of focus to balance the budget for 2024, 2025. Who's speaking on this, Associate Director?
Thank you, and through the chair, I will be speaking to this report, and we do have a bit of a presentation just to help us to walk through the report, and we'll be happy to share with trustees, but this is just, again, excerpts from the report. So when we look at just a little bit of background first and reminder, when we brought forward the projected deficit at the end of January, we were looking at a projected deficit of 34.8 million. We know that we're in year 3, or we will be in year 3 of a 3-year deficit recovery program. And there is a requirement under the Education Act to submit a balanced budget. So that's setting us up for, that means that we do need to look for reductions. And so where will we look for reductions to help us with our structural deficit? And as part of this and part of the discussions, and just wanted to clarify here, there are some things that are outside of the board's control that are contributing to our structural deficit. That does include statutory benefits that have been increasing over the last, now it'll be 6 years, that the funding has not, or the benefit benchmark has not changed. We do have a school closure moratorium, meaning that we know that we are in a position where we have excess capacity, or schools that are really small, but we are unable to close those schools. That means that we have additional operating costs and capital costs, but operating costs is what we're talking about today, associated with these schools. We do have an increase in replacement costs as a result of the change in sick leave plan. And we know that there are variations across the province. Some boards have a higher share than us, some have a lower, but we do know that all boards have gone up since the change in sick leave plan. So there is a component of our costs that relate to this change that we did not control. And the last one that I wanted to highlight is when we moved to central bargaining, our grade for teachers was higher than the ministry grid that was approved and bargained centrally. And we do not have the ability to change our grid. And as we increase the grid on a percentage basis year over year, the funding is based on the ministry grid. So as we increase the percentage attached to our grid, that difference continues to increase. So just wanted to outline that. When we look at our projected or potential areas to look at to balance the budget, there were a number of things that we considered. The first is the draft multi-year strategic plan, which is currently under review. We know that if these are going to be the strategic directions of the board based on significant consultation and input from community and from staff and from trustees, that this is where we should be allocating our resources to support this multi-year strategic plan. So when we look at what we need, the types of things that we need to continue to support, or potentially the areas that we could look at to reduce, we just need to keep that in the back of our mind. There are ministry regulations, so some spending is controlled by ministry regulations. Class size is an example of where ministry regulation impacts the number of staff that we have. We have collective agreements. Again, class size could be part of that. We know that CUPE has a protected complement, so we just need to take those things into consideration. And we also have to consider the impact of our decisions on direct support to students. So when we're bringing these things forward and looking at these potential areas, these are all the things that staff has considered in providing this information today. So I'm going to outline these, and I think it's important for us to recognize that today we're not bringing forward the detail related to where we want to, or where we're suggesting that there could be potentials for savings. We just wanted to outline the areas that we're looking at, again, based on those things that we talked about previously. So the first one is continuing education. It does list here what's included in continuing education. We talked about it last year through the budget process. We are overspending by almost $7 million in this area when a number of boards are either break even or actually in a position where continuing education is something that helps the board's overall budget. So we are reviewing each of the programs and bringing forward recommendations to assist in reducing the deficit. The next area is outdoor education. We do know that there is a resolution that every student in grade 5 to 8 has the opportunity to participate in an overnight program, and that students in K to 8 have opportunities to participate in day programs. We also know that we overspend on outdoor education by about 3.1 million, and that is just on the operating side. Most boards do not have their own outdoor education facilities, so we are lucky. At the same time, the boards are not permitted to use their spending for renewal or SCI on these outdoor education facilities without permission from the ministry. So the deficit of 3.1 million is for the operating costs on an annual basis, and then we also have some deferred maintenance that would be related to these facilities that we would need permission to address those concerns. So we are reviewing outdoor education to bring forward recommendations to assist in reducing the deficit while adhering to the board resolution. So I think that's important. We're not looking to make reductions to the commitment that we've made, but we are looking at ways that maybe we could meet this commitment in a more cost-effective manner. We're also looking at opportunities for other revenue. We know that most of our funding comes from the GSN. About 10% comes from other revenues, including permits, interest revenue, international student fees, leases, other fees. So we are reviewing all those areas to ensure that, one, that the other revenues are covering the costs associated with the programs. So there are some cases where maybe we're not recovering our costs associated with what we're charging revenue for. And then there are other areas where we are looking just to ensure that we have maximized our other revenue opportunities. And we know that we've heard this from trustees through previous budget processes, including international students, for example. So we just want to make sure that we are maximizing our revenue. Another area where we'll be looking is central staffing. We have every year, and it is good practice, I think, to review these areas to ensure that we are being as lean as possible, because again, we want to ensure that as much of our resources as possible are directly supporting students. That being said, this is an area where we have made reductions previously, and so it gets harder and harder to still provide the services that we need to provide to assist our schools in operating effectively at the same time as making reductions. So that's where our challenge is, but we are reviewing this area. The next area that we're reducing, we're looking at the replacement cost for staffing absences, and I'm sure that this is something that you've been hearing about when you speak to your superintendents and your principals, that absences are challenging, and we know from a budget perspective that the amount that we're paying for replacement costs have continued to increase year over year. And so as we want to ensure that the budget that we set forward is realistic, I liken it to, knowing that your rent is going to be $1,000 a month, and if we only budget 500 and hope that we find some savings somewhere, I don't believe that that's appropriate. But at the same time, there are things that are being put in place to help us to assist in reducing the number of staff absences. And so we are looking at what is a reasonable amount that we can project in savings or reduction in costs for next year. We also are looking at our renewal costs charged to operating. So we know that our buildings are old, average age of over 60 years. So there are maintenance costs that are, and renewal costs that are associated with having schools that are that old. We also know that costs have continued to increase. Inflationary costs, the cost of materials have increased. And we know that absenteeism impacts the costs associated with some of that maintenance work. So because of all of those costs, we have actually spent more than we are able to charge to our renewal grant for the maintenance portion. And therefore, we have been using some of our operating budget to assist with those costs. So we know that how important it is to continue to maintain the buildings, and we also know how important it is to assist in balancing the budget. So we are just working to see if there are any savings that we can project without impacting the work that is necessary to be done. And the last area, and I'm going to say that this, we looked here as well last year. It is good practice to look at all of the areas in the budget where we overspend. But we also know that many of the areas that we overspend have significant value, are an important part of fully implementing the board's priorities, their obligations, resolutions, and operations. And we know that when we make reductions here, that there is a potential to result in a range of impacts from decreased programming to the various other impacts. So we have to look at these areas, and we will bring forward suggestions which again take into account those things that we said that we needed to consider right up front, right? Direct impact on students, collective agreements, regulations, multi-year strategic plan. So I think all trustees' calendars have been updated, but just to make sure that we're all aware of sort of our updated budget schedule based on the information that we have. So we have today where we're looking at our potential areas of focus. There will be 2 webinars with stakeholders next week, one in the evening on Tuesday, one during the day on Wednesday. We are also going to Student Senate on Thursday to receive feedback and then look at additional ways that it would be possible to collect student feedback in an efficient manner. On March 4th, as is usual, we will bring forward school-based staffing for approval. We will also bring back the feedback that we've received from those information sessions, and we will be looking at our financial facts document. And then on March 19th, which is the Tuesday after March break, we will be bringing back detailed options to balance. So all of the things that we talked about today, where we are looking at potential areas, we will use those and any feedback provided today and through the public information or webinars to be able to bring back some concrete recommendations for the board to consider. On March 26th, we've set aside a night for delegations. We did this last year as well when we had some reductions, just to ensure that we have the appropriate time to discuss the recommendations on March 27th, which is when that would come to board for approval at a special board on April 2nd. And again, this is in accordance with the schedule that trustees had approved in September to pass this budget prior to the GSNs being released. And so our best information that we have right now is that the GSM will be released after the provincial budget, which we've heard at the end of March, I think is the latest thing that's being said, so, and being shared. So again, that for trustees, that's just the projected schedule for right now. So with that, I will open it up to any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director Zucker. And we do have a speakers list. Trustee Laskin.
Much through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. I have I understand they're just here for ideas now, and then you're going to be working on the details to bring back to us on March 19th. So, Mr. Chair, to staff, I have a few details that I'd really like to see prior to or included in the March 19th report with regard to continuing education. So I'm just going to ask the questions now. I don't expect answers. So in the report that we dealt with on the 20th of June, 2023, there was a chart about continuing education, and the board made a decision there since the last budget to increase the general interest program cost by 20%. But we've never seen any year-to-date or the impacts of that change. So I would really like a line-to-line year-to-date for the current under each of the programs that's covered under continuing education, so we can see the impact of that decision. I'm also interested, there was a very small footnote in that report that talked about revenue generated through the GSNs. So I'd also like to understand, I know you said it was a $6.9 million overspending, but I'd really like to understand the actual revenue that the board generates through the GSNs and the permit costs underneath the continuing education, so we can really understand what the net is. And then the other question that was asked to us today, and I think it's a very good question, is because continuing education has such a broad community impact, not just obviously for parents and caregivers of TDSB students, what strategy do staff plan to use to solicit input of those stakeholders involved in the Con Ed programs? And I have one suggestion for staff, knowing that the spring, some of the spring programming is just being announced and just going out for registration. I'm wondering if there can be a automatic, when somebody registers for a spring program, if there can be an automatic link to please provide us feedback through some sort of survey with high-level questions, or in the Community Use of Schools Community Advisory Committee, if again, there can be some sort of link somewhere to get feedback, because we have to advertise this, and parents pay attention to TDSB budgets, but since we lost taxing ability in 1997, we don't have seniors pile up in our meetings to care about our budget, but we used to. I mean, when we had our own taxing ability, the meetings would be filled with actual residents and seniors because it concerned their taxes and their mill rate. But we've lost that sense of public interest in our budget. You're interested if you're involved in the system. You're actually not that interested because it doesn't directly affect you. But these programs directly affect citizens, community members in the city. So I think it's a really good question about the strategy that we're using to get their input. They're not going to come in droves and depute. So I'd like staff to consider that and the opportunity now, since I don't think the registration's even open yet for the spring. We still have the spring we have. So I'm really thinking that timing wise, we can capitalize on that. So those are my questions about the looking at the Con Ed. Looking at the outdoor ed, I do understand that we're one of the few boards that actually has our own programs, and I'm so bloody grateful for that. I know it costs us money, but it is such a necessary thing to do in a large urban environment where many kids don't have even the opportunity to go outside, let alone go on vacations with their families. It is such money well spent, and I'll just unequivocally say I'll be interested to see what staff bring back, but I'm a huge supporter of outdoor education, and I actually think we've bare bonesed it enough. This is one of those things that keeps coming back year after year after year, and anyway, but I will try to remain open to what staff bring before us. And I'm going to run out of time, so please put me back on the list, because I am going to, I do want to move a motion about staff relooking for their detailed report on March 19th, relooking at vice principals and school-based safety staff. So there's my time is up right now. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lasky. Staff, do you want to respond to this?
Thank you, and through the chair. So we did hear what you were asking for, and we will ensure that we bring that information back through the detailed report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee McLean?
Thank you, and through the chair. I'd like to explore, if I can, the $6 million of the renewal costs that are being charged to the operating budget. You know, I mean, it's the last place we want to pay for it, and we have money in other places. Have we asked for permission to use POD, for example, to address this on a unique one-time basis or a unique set of circumstances? Because coming out of the operating budget is, you know, that's the place we've got the most pressure.
Thank you, and through the chair, I think when we look at using proceeds of disposition, this is one area where I do believe that we can look for support. We are also working with ministry staff, staff to see if there are things that are currently not eligible in our renewal grants that maybe should be eligible. And I'll give you an example, the fleet costs associated with our maintenance staff. Most boards will contract out, say plumbing, if there was a plumbing emergency, they would contract that out. And we use our own staff. So when you contract it out, when other boards contract it out, that whole amount is eligible to be charged to, say, the renewal. Whereas when we use our own staff, the ministry has come back and said tools and vehicles are operating expenses. And so we're having a conversation about why that isn't the case for TDSB. And if we are successful in securing that understanding, then that would free up some room for us as well. So I think we're in a unique circumstance, and we're hopeful that through our advocacy from staff to staff that we are able to get that recognition.
Thank you, and I hope you do well with that. I would ask, though, that if you get to where they're recognizing this argument, and that we after they say yes, that the following not before, because you don't want to scare them off, but after they say yes, that exploring the concept of being able to do it retroactively from an accounting point of view so that we could address some of the money from an accounting point of view that we'd spent in one area, and that might actually be able to potentially help us with the deficit that we're carrying forward. But I'm also interested in, last year in the budget process, we had a unique recognition by the ministry regarding the negative effects that the moratorium was having on us and the added costs of running buildings that we would, in a perfect world, be able to close, and a recognition that there was a cost to the moratorium for us. And we were, they recognized that and allowed us to use, a one-time for POD to be used in that manner. So I guess what I'm asking in terms of, have we approached this from a proactive, like, if they accept the position, then, can we get them to upfront us money in the GSN, in recognition of this expense that they are and have continued since they've been in power to impose on us. Like, since one of the early things we did when I was first elected 6 years ago was pass the secondary school reform, and everyone was excited about what that opportunity presented and how we could better serve students and families, and we still can't do that. And the government that prides itself on business efficiencies and cutting the slack, it's a really awkward position that they keep sticking us with this moratorium that ties our hands and doesn't allow us to be to better serve and carry out the responsibilities that we have. So I guess I'm asking you about reaching out in advance to get recognition, and also about the potential of doing what we did last year if it comes to identifying an amount that the ministry deems appropriate and it comes to POD, whether we could, as a way of the challenging numbers that are before us.
So thank you, and through the chair, take that into consideration. Certainly, when we bring back our options to balance, we will look at how proceeds of disposition, that one-time funding may be part of our solution for 24-25.
Thank you, Trustee McLean. Trustee Dawson?
Thank you, and through the chair. I had a couple of questions. So first of all, I'm just wondering what the communication plan is around this. Last year we had some social media tiles that were provided, and I think maybe this year, I mean, this is just my opinion, take it or leave it, that it would be helpful if we could have like a targeted campaign to follow every single budget meeting that we have. So what are the key messages? Like today I'm seeing things contributing to our structural deficit, $35 million anticipated shortfall. Like we could have 2 really punchy tiles for something like that. And then what is the messaging to follow in the subsequent meetings? So I'm just wondering what's planned around that.
Thank you, Trustee Dawson.
So thank you, and through the chair, Executive Officer Ryan Bird is online, and maybe he would like to speak to the communication plan.
Good evening, trustees. Through the chair, we do have a comprehensive communications plan as part of the budget. We've already shared budget information and a link to our budget website with all parents, guardians, caregivers, and staff through the most recent edition of TDSB Connects. that takes you to the website, outlines all of the future budget meetings, FBEC meetings, more on the budget process, and we'll have all of the budget documents located on that website. In addition to that, we're already in the process of developing graphics that not only the board social media channels can share, but trustees will also be able to share through their respective channels. There will be newsletter content, additional information to highlight the budget, and we will be keeping track of that and promoting not only the FBEC meetings, but the opportunities for our community to learn more through webinars that are occurring next week, through the public consultation process and delegations. So all that information is part of a comprehensive budget communications plan that will be rolled out, again, really as we move forward the upcoming days and weeks.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Just shifting gears, I was wondering about outdoor education. Do we currently charge students a fee to go on these overnight trips?
It's if I may, through the chair, it's a very nominal fee.
Okay. So maybe, I mean, I know we've already sort of said, maybe you could ask for additional contributions on a form, but it's potentially something to explore if people are willing to give a little bit more than the nominal fee. But I also, on the other hand, think we need to be careful how many times we actually do that. So it's something for staff to just consider.
Thank you.
So thank you. Okay, that's it for me for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Dawson. Trustee Diabetes.
Thank you, Chair. To staff, first question is in regards to the communications campaign, a bit of a follow-up from the last speaker. So what information has been shared with trustees so far? What have we shared at this point?
Through the chair, if I may, it's Ryan Bird. So I'm happy to share that we've shared, I believe, newsletter content through trustees to share additional information with their own communities, and we're currently working on social media graphics that can be shared by trustees with their communities, additional information. Again, we've shared information with all parents, guardians, and caregivers about the upcoming budget, directing them to the website for more information where that will be regularly updated throughout the process. But we're in the process of developing those social media graphics referenced earlier so that we can provide those to trustees along with key messages or anything like that to help support outreach to their communities.
As a follow-up through the chair, when will this information start to be shared? I'm keeping in mind that we have the town halls on just about a week from now.
Absolutely. The intention is to begin sharing social media graphics with trustees this week so that they can begin sharing that information.
If I can ask the question again, when will it be shared? Not like what week, like when? Will it be tomorrow, Wednesday, etc.? And I ask specifically because, you know, I also think it's late. And so I don't mean to be harsh on the question, but I want us to be successful on this. And I haven't seen any materials anywhere publicly outside of things referenced directly from this committee. So when will those materials be shared and when will the public see them?
I believe I can, through the chair, if I may, trustee, I can say by the end of this week. I don't have an exact date because they do have to go through, given the numbers that we're dealing with the budget and the factual review process that they have to undergo. We do have to take the necessary time to make sure that we are getting that right, but they will be shared publicly by the end of this week, including with trustees, so that they can echo those same messages through their communities on their social media channels. Again, this is building on the message that has already been shared with parents, guardians, and caregivers, sharing information about the budget process, all of the upcoming FBEC meetings, more information on webinars that are coming up next week. Those have been shared on social media. So this is further building on part of the overall communications plan to get that message out.
As part of the last FBEC meeting, there was a great report that talked about how we're going to sort of change and transform our capital investment program, and information went out about that, but it went out on Friday afternoon, which is normally when we in government, so to speak, is when you dump things that you don't want to be followed up on. So I saw some of that information on Friday. Maybe it's just my own perspective of when the information went out. Maybe it went out to other stakeholders earlier. So when you say this week, the reason why I'm asking the question is because I don't want us to sort of drop information on people's laps on Friday afternoon that may sort of miss all the media cycles this week, and then what happens next week and who gets the information next week. How are we actually trying to push people into these town halls that are basically a week away, and how do we not have some information prepared is my concern.
And through the chair, yes. So we have shared information. I should add that social media graphics were shared with trustees last week as part of Trustee Weekly to begin the rollout with regard, pardon me, to the public board webinars that are being held next week. We've also been sharing those on TDSB social media channels. So those are already on the public budget website, which we have shared with all parents, guardians, and caregivers. We have shared the social media graphics already begun with trustees last week. We're also sharing information with all the community advisory committees within the TDSB, our union partners, members of the public, social media. Again, we're sharing that information through social media. So the sharing of this information is already underway, and we will continue to build on that this week and into the upcoming weeks to make sure that everyone's aware not only of the public webinars, but updates as we move through the budget process.
So thank you for that, because that fills in some of the gaps and actually answers a couple of the questions I had. So moving on to another question, or rather a comment in terms of something that I observed over last month. We had our PIAC conference, a great success compared to last year in terms of turnout. And I think one of the key components there was how we share that information as well. I think there was some key changes in terms of how information was communicated and who was communicating the information. Our superintendents were getting our principals to push the school councils to get the information out there. So there are things that we can do internally, I feel, to ensure that we get the information out to folks. As Trustee Laskin was mentioning, outside of people that are directly involved with what we do, often people aren't hearing us, and so we need to make sure that those same stakeholders, our parent councils, our unions, and other folks, they have information in order for them to be able to get out there and do that. So I'm hoping that's what's transpiring. From my perspective, I only get to see part of it. So sorry if I sound critical. I just think this is a very key component of what we need to do. So that's at the end of my questions in terms of the communication component. I'm looking forward to hearing from folks at the town halls and hearing back in terms of input. Excited to see how it is that people react to the students' needs budget and how it is that we shape that conversation. It is an important conversation, and with that, Chair, I'll cede my time. But thanks again for staff for all the work they're doing on this.
Thank you, Trustee Ditavides. Trustee Erhard.
Thank you very much. This is a hard one to talk about, and so forgive me. And I want to thank other trustees for their questions and comments, particularly Trustee Laskin on outdoor education. I'm heartbroken that we're discussing it again, and I'm happy to hear that we're looking to live up to the board's commitment, and I want to speak very strongly in support of keeping our public assets and public programming within our school board to the best of the ability that we can, because it is such a long-term value add for our board to have all of that capacity in-house. And so just want to continue to make the case very strongly for that. I wanted to ask if we're meeting with ministry staff to discuss the financial situation, but I've heard consistently in other responses that we are. And I'm just so frustrated that we got a fiscal update this past week from the province where there's more than $3 billion in contingency funds, and here we are having this discussion. I did want to focus my questions on adult education, which is part of the areas that will in continuing education that I understand will be brought forward. And I know we had a report during the last budget process last June. And so I saw from that adult education, that there is, I believe, GSN funding for adult education, but I wanted to see if I could get a response tonight on if there's targeted funding from the Ministry for Adult Education and advanced programming in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Arhat, Associate Director.
Thank you, and through the chair, I will go to Superintendent Peter Chang.
Thank you, and through the chair, yes, there is funding provided to adult day school students, for adult day school students, my apologies. Within the current structure of the TDSB, there are 5 sites that hold space for adult learners who are 21 and over. Those are the ones that we would term as adult day school students. And in those same buildings, we also offer offer credits for students who are 18 to 20 years old in a program called Advance. And I make that distinction because Advance is funded according to regular day school funding, similar to a secondary school situation, whereas adult day schools, the ones who serve 21 and over, are funded by the ministry through the continuing education grant. So the formula is different from the way in which advanced students are funded. So I hope that helps to answer some of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful to me. I am very concerned, and that the age group will shift over the years, but just how the pandemic, because if we're in 2024 right now, and so my understanding is young people who would have been in grade 9 at the onset of the pandemic are now considered adults who in theory may be aging out of the system. So they're I believe most are currently in our advanced category, but they're moving into our adult day school category. And this is a cohort that has experienced significant gaps and learning loss due to province of Ontario school shutdowns. And so I'd be interested in learning from staff if there's any acknowledgement of that by the ministry right now in the system around what is coming into our adult education program, if we're seeing those impacts, and if the ministry is acknowledging those impacts and how it's conceptualizing of funding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Arhat. Superintendent Peter Chang, do you want to comment on this?
If I may start, and then through the chair, defer to my Associate Director, Luis Risco. So the staff are in contact, certainly with the ministry, understanding the current situation that our adult day schools are in. Since the pandemic and even before the pandemic, there has been a decline of enrollment in adult day schools for a variety of reasons. Many of our students who attend adult day schools are not only the students who require additional courses to get their degree, their diploma, their OSSD. There are also newcomers to Canada who would like to upgrade their certifications through the OSSD in order to look at different job opportunities. So the ministry is aware of those situations. They continue to provide us with a level of funding, which unfortunately doesn't meet the needs of our school board. But they are aware that we are experiencing some of these financial challenges, and the fact that with the decreasing enrollment in adult day schools, it continues to provide so I guess some more opportunities to correspond with them so that they do become more aware. And then to my colleague, Louise.
Thank you very much, Peter, and through you, Chair, to Trustee Earhart. This is a good news story, Trustee Earhart, and thank you for your concern. Absolutely, we are seeing the effects of the pandemic, particularly on the mental health and well-being of our students. Our schools do an extraordinary job at knowing their learners through grades 9 and 12, watching their credit counts and engaging in structures such as credit rescue, our student success teams. If a student is seeing a credit at risk, there would be a wraparound support to try our very best to be supporting that student to earn that credit. And of course, our adult day programs are there, as well as advance to close any gaps that may be in existence. But as a board and as across the province, we are seeing our graduation rates continue to grow. So that is the good news story. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's wonderful to hear. I'm glad to hear that it's a good news story, because I suppose the calls that I receive, I must say, they've been increasing this year, and they tend to be people who have experienced significant gaps and learning losses, in part brought on by the pandemic. And so I am concerned that this is an area where we're looking around proposed options to balance the budget, knowing that the ministry currently does not fund the costs in adult education, just knowing that this is such a crucial group of young people. I still believe that those in the age categories that we're speaking about are young people, and believe that we want to do everything we can to support them in positive educational outcomes. And so to my trustee colleagues as well, I simply want to say that I'm hearing a lot from age groups that have, in theory, aged out of our system, that are over 18, but still require significant supports for their academic achievement at grade school levels. And so I really hope that this is an area where we can continue to meet the demand that I'm seeing there. And thank you so much.
I think if I may, through the chair, just to provide a little bit of qualification or explanation to Trustee Earhart. Trustee Earhart, we receive the same funding for students from age, say, 15 to 18 as we do from students 18 to 20. So that we call that advance. Students have an opportunity to go to advance. So that age group is fully funded. Where we see a difference in funding is age 21 and up, and that will be our adult learners. So just to reassure you, and thank you for letting us know that you're having an increase in outreach, and we'd be happy to talk further with you about that. Thanks.
Yeah, and thank you. I do think because we're now 4 years out from the pandemic, we're starting to see that group go from advance into to hit over into the other category. And so I don't know if we're seeing the numbers play out on the ground, but I'm certainly seeing, in terms of outreach for supports, I'm seeing it more and more. And so as this area is explored due to the chronic underfunding of our education system, I really want to make sure that we can still do what we can for these learners. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. Trustee Laskin.
Will still be a question because I realize I'll have to move a business arising after this item is dealt with. So I'll go back on the list for that. In the slide deck on slide 3 under background, there was a category of things that are outside the board's control but are contributing to the structural deficit. And I know my colleagues also spoke to this earlier. I'm wondering if staff, when they do their detailed analysis, if they can put costs associated with those. For example, I think statutory benefits should be fairly easy to come up with. School closure moratorium, this probably is a little more detailed, but I know, for example, I have an area in the city that I represent where there's been a plan for a long time to consolidate 3 schools into 2. And that's been a plan for years. And I'm thinking about every year, the cost of keeping under-enrolled schools operating, not just in operating costs, but also in facilities cost. And that's only one set across the city. So I'm wondering if that could be added up. The increase in replacement costs, about the change in sick leave, again, out of the board's control. In fact, you know, realistically, if we really were following public health advice, we would want our staff to stay home for 10 days, frankly, after any COVID sickness. So, you know, I'm concerned that that falls on us when it really should be a provincial cost. And obviously the difference between the TDSB grid for teachers versus the ministry grid. There's other benchmarks that aren't listed here where our costs far exceed the benchmark we're provided. I'm wondering if that could also be added in, because I guess where I'm heading, and this goes with all the conversations tonight about communication and making sure the public is aware, is there are decisions this board makes that we have to stand up and justify, like outdoor education or continuing education. But there are other things that are foisted upon us that we simply have no control over. And I'd really love to see the juxtaposition of what our budget deficit is versus those costs that are completely outside of our control. Because in my mind, that's the offset. And even though that's not probably strictly legal, in fact, I know it isn't legal in terms of how the government defines balancing a budget, I think it's part of our story. And I think telling our story in a way that the public can understand it is critical to the success of advocacy for, and I'm not even talking about adding in, I'm just talking about staving off further cuts, when I am sure many of our constituents would, especially parents and caregivers of kids in our system, would say we're not funding enough. So I'm really hopeful that that's part of staff's plan in bringing us back those details. Through you, Mr. Chair, if I can just get confirmation from staff.
Thank you. And through the chair, we will definitely do our best to be able to assign costs to those specific areas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Do we have anybody else?
No.
Trustee Laskin, do you have a
I'm
motion?
going to have to wait till this is received and then move business arising. And I think Trustee Chernislin also has business.
So we do not have any more speakers on this list. Can I have a mover and seconder for this item? Trustee Laskin, Trustee Arts. Trustee Hassan, how do you vote?
Trustee
Hassan in favor.
Shan opposed.
He's opposed to receive a report?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I had voted as opposed.
So how do you vote, Trustee San?
Opposed. Not in
Opposed?
favor.
Staff are correcting it right now. Thank you.
That carries. So trustees, we do have two notice of motions, one by Trustee Laskin and one by Trustee Chernislin. So we'll go with Trustee Laskin first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I was, I think, a bit caught off guard when staff, in their report of January 29th, reminded us, I guess I was caught off guard because I had forgotten, that the additions of the vice principals that we added into last year's budget process and the school-based, the safety staffing were 1 year. So I completely understand that their assumption was they had to strip those out budget to begin this process. That being said, and I'm sure I'm not the only trustee, the instability that brings to our system in terms of removing VPs, adding MVPs, removing VPs, adding MVPs, this would be the third year of that. I'm really concerned about that. And I'm also really concerned about the fact that some of these safety positions, they're needed in our schools. But I'm also aware that staff needs to do their analysis about what is needed and bring it back to us. So I'm purposely made this a bit vague, not adding back in the amounts that were in this year's budget, because we could need more, or we could need less in some of those categories. So I'd like to move that in preparation of the detailed options to balance the 2024-25 budget that will be coming to a special FBEC on March 19th, staff reconsider the assumptions that were presented in the FBEC report of January 29th in preparation of the final financial positions, specifically the removal of the vice principal positions that were added through the 2023-2024 budget and the safety positions that were added in January of 2023. I think it's self-explanatory. Positions are vital within our system, and I believe Trustee McLean has sent me a text to second this, and I'd like to put it on the table, and I'd appreciate, Mr. Chair, if you can get staff's response to this before other comments.
Just for clarification, who is seconding this motion?
McLean will second. Thank you.
Trustee McLean is seconding.
Thank you, and through the chair, thank you to the trustee for the vagueness of this motion and the understanding that there will be some analysis done. I believe that the motion is very respectful to the process, and staff will be happy to bring back this information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Does any trustees have a question on the motion?
I do.
Okay. Go ahead, Trustee Johnson.
I just want to clarify, maybe if staff could just, I want to just make sure I understand this motion. Is it that staff will bring back this as an option as part of the budget in some capacity?
Yes,
Or
through the chair. So as we bring forward the options to balance, we will also bring forward any additions to the budget there are some, I think special education has a few requests, so we would have to consider that to end up in a final position. So it would be an add to the budget. We'll take the time between now and when this report comes forward to ensure that the number that we bring forward is based on careful consideration of our actual needs for next year.
okay, so it's not like a starting point with this. It's as part of the options to balance. This would be one of the pieces you'll bring back. I just want to make sure I understand it.
Yeah, through the chair, and I think because it's through the budget process, it will increase the deficit to have to then, if we're going to balance, we're going to have further reductions. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily the starting point inclusive, but it will, whether we include it as a starting point or whether we include it as an add through this process, we will still have to increase the reductions required.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Janoslin. Trustee Erhard?
Just a comment. I'm very much in support of this and think it's a very important and timely motion. I think it's very important for staff within our system to know that we would like to see some consideration of this through the process. And I just want to express appreciation for staff who go to work every day, knowing that their positions are funded with temporary one-time funding. It's an extremely challenging work environment on the best of days with all of our kids. Speaking as a parent, and I'm very grateful to the vice principals in our system. If I had my way, we'd have a vice principal at every single school. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Ahad. Can we open the vote?
McLean in favor.
Shan in favor.
Hassan in favor.
And the motion carries. We have second motion by Trustee Chenos-Lin, seconded by Trustee McLean. Trustee Chenos-Lin, you want to speak on this?
Thank you, Chair. So through the chair, this is a motion requesting that the funding we received last spring regarding the Enhanced Student Safety Funding Grant, it eventually came in the as a PPF, but it enabled us to start work on community programming in priority neighborhood improvement areas, doing proactive violence prevention work, if you remember. So we were actually able to start last March with March break programming, other kinds of programming that we ran in the spring through the summer, and that's been running this school year, that's been tremendously important in communities. And that funding is expiring in March, which is a grave concern to us because it isn't at the moment in a sustainable position in the GSN. So we don't know if it will be, if that PPF will be renewed. So ideally, we'd love to see this entered in the GSN so it's sustainable. That's part of the ask here, but really the urgent ask is that that it continues to be funded so that this work can continue and these programs can continue because they are vital to students in a number of areas in the city. So there's a few parts to this motion. The first is that we're asking the chair to write a letter to the Minister of Education regarding the need for this funding to continue and that it needs to be sustainable and predictable. But the second piece that's also, I think, really important is that we engage the community partners who are so vital to this work. And, they're the glue that holds this together. And we need them to be also reiterating our call, and that needs to be loud and clear to the ministry as well. So we're asking that we reach out to, that our staff reach out to all our community partners that have been granted this funding through us, and that they write to the Minister of Education requesting the renewal of this funding. So it's kind of a multi-pronged approach. And I will also say that we have arranged for the Minister of Education to come out and see these programs in action as part of this work. So that's happening in early March. And we're very hopeful that this will be continued. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions about this if anyone has any, and I hope people will support this.
Thank you, Trustee Chenos-Lin. As a seconder, Trustee McLean, do you want to say something?
The chair of the board is far more eloquent than I. I don't want to risk muddying the waters, so I'm good. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee McLean. Do you have a speakers list, trustees? Do you have any question on this motion? Vice Chair Shan, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just asking if the mover or the chair would be okay with the friendly amendment if it is to change the word requesting these organizations also, right? Changing the word requesting to encouraging these organizations, because requesting makes it seem like we are engaging them to get into an advocacy, and different organizations have different appetite for advocacy related works, especially writing to Ministry of Education. So instead of the word requesting, changing it to encouraging these organizations.
Trustee Chanoslin, do you want to respond?
I couldn't hear, I'm of course open to friendly amendments depending on what it is, but I couldn't hear the word that was being suggested to replace requesting.
Encouraging.
Encouraging. Sure.
We just changing the words or?
Yep.
So it would be encouraging these organizations to also write. We would just also need to add to. Could we have it say encouraging these organizations to also write?
The word "to" is missing. We get the gist of it.
I know, but it should be grammatically correct. It's just you encourage someone to. Sorry, I can't help it. Title change. What happened? There may also be a, can we recess for 2 minutes?
Sure. Going to recess for 2 minutes. So we made some changes, and the mover and the seconder is okay with the changes. Am I right? Trustee Chancellor?
Just to draw everyone's attention, we changed the title just to reflect the motion. I had made a change in the motion earlier in the day to use the word neighborhood improvement areas. And so that wasn't reflected in the title. So we've just added that for consistency in terms of how we word it in the work that's being done. And we've made the change suggested by our colleague, Vice Chair Shan, replacing in bullet 2, replacing requesting with encouraging these organizations to also write to the Minister of Education. So I'm hoping that we've captured your suggestion, Trustee Shan.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Good. Writing is a collaborative, I say this all the time, writing is a collaborative experience. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Trustee Chanosling. Trustee McLean, Trustee Shan, can we open the vote?
McLean in favor.
Shan in favor.
Hassan in favor.
I'm in favor too.
Bedovitis in favor.
And the motion is carried. Before we go on to the last item, I would like to thank Associate Director Zucker, Executive Officer Snyder, and the team, and all the staff who are present here and online. All the trustees, thank you for joining. Community members, for joining this AFPAC meeting. It is very important that we participate in these discussions before the final vote is presented. So thank you very much on behalf of the AFPAC committee for joining tonight. And can I have a mover to adjourn the meeting? Trustee Laskin and Trustee Arts.
Yay.
Trustees online, say aye. Anybody opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.